Okay, this is one of the stories from my Twisted Tales of Cornwall. It's called Penance in Penzance. After eating breakfast in silence, Jonathan picked up his bag from the lobby, fastened up his fine leather shoes, politely kissed Mamma's cheek and walked briskly to the smelting factory, which was only a few hundred yards up the track. Working days were always the same. Same clothes, same breakfast, same routine. The sameness was his comfort blanket. It meant he didn't have to think too much about the tedium of his life. Today, though, Jonathan was aware of a vague fluttering in his stomach, like a canary in a mine trying to escape its cage. Perhaps there was something afoot. Perhaps today would be different. The factory was bleak and imposing, with 4 furnaces belching smoke through the chimneys by the smelting house. Australian tin ore stood in the morning light, like a mountain of doom, unloaded from the ships at Mounts Bay near Kyandor Brook the day before. The ore had been hauled up the slipway by strong men on a barely living wage, through tunnels under the railway and up Kyandor Coombe to the smelting works. It was hard work, and Jonathan hated to think he was part of this exploitation of the poor and the desperate. An even larger mountain of Cornish ore stood at the other end of the yard, brought in by the new railroad from Cape Cornwall and the great Dolcuth mine at Cambourne. The wagons passed the estate office near the shoreline, and the drivers would stop there to collect their wages from the officious-looking clerk employed by his father to oversee the financial affairs of the company. Jonathan's office, which was much less grand, was housed at the smelting yard in a low building with grey windows that looked out like the mournful eyes of a prisoner set apart from the world, pleading to be freed. Every day as he walked over the threshold, the dark heaviness of it made him feel reduced and betrayed. It was a creeping sadness that was hard to describe, nebulous and unformed. It was the part of him that scripted his nightmares, the meaning of which were a mystery to his conscious mind. He entered the low building through a blue door and walked past the room where a younger version of his cousin Roland was already huddled over the Scholes and Glidden typewriter. Making his way along the windowless corridor, he took great care to make sure his footfalls were as silent as he could make them. His father spent most of his time at the estate office, flitting in and out of his more functional office at the smelting works, just to make sure no one was slacking in their duty. But today he'd seen his father walking up the track to the factory, and so Jonathan knew he'd already be there, poring over the orders and the invoicing, checking Jonathan's work. As he turned the last corner of the dark corridor, he saw the light spilling from the open door of his father's office. An open door always meant trouble. Jonathan didn't exactly creep past, as that implies a slowness, whereas his silence had the speed and stealth of a fox escaping the hounds, producing nothing more than a blurred shadow in the dark corridor. Reaching his own office without incident, he felt a degree of relief and calm. He was safer there, less conspicuous, and he sighed as he slumped behind his oak desk with brass handles and an inset top of fine leather. He always sighed when he sat there. It was a habit he had. It prepared him for the day that lay ahead. Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out a pair of fine gold-rimmed spectacles that his oculist had chosen for him, telling him they would suit his long, wide face and unusually high forehead. He placed them on his nose and spent a few moments staring vacantly into the room, expressionless. This won't do, he thought to himself. Must get on. Taking a deep breath, he scratched his long bushy sideburns to make them look fuller and more imposing. He'd grown them in an effort to make himself more acceptable to his father, who had worn them ever since Prince Albert had visited town. Of course, Jonathan's were a dark, rich brown, whereas his father's were wiry and sullen grey, like his skin and his manner. Straightening his smart, double-breasted Newmarket coat of black cloth, he began to sift through the mound of paperwork in front of him, a mound whose height never changed, A piece of paper in his out tray was always balanced by a more urgent piece in his in tray. Excuse me. Around 10:30, he heard another urgent piece of paper approaching down the corridor, and his heart sank. His father always wore a black frock coat made from the best quality wool, a gift from cousin Roland, with a satin collar that matched the 6 satin-covered buttons on the front and the 3 on each of the cuffs. He never fastened it up, seeming to delight in showing off the lining of fine Silesian polished cotton. It was his badge of honour. When he walked, it flapped around his grey worsted trousers like the wings of some giant bat, frightening the employees and frightening Jonathan even more. Whenever he heard the flap of the coat approaching his office along the dark corridor, he would get palpitations and start sweating. And here it was again, accompanied by the clack, clack of the metal-tipped boots and the thump, thump of his heart. His father's arrival was imminent. I'm going to leave it there.